It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster.
Labour will start by bringing forward an employment rights bill to legislate for this within the first 100 days of entering office. That's a cast-iron commitment.
The government's long-awaited plan on workers' rights will be published tomorrow. What will that mean for businesses and employees?
The age of mass migration, that must end too. It's not making us any richer.
That was the former immigration minister. Is he right? And new figures show the UK population rose by a record amount last year.
Thank you, conference.
After the party conferences, where does the Prime Minister and his government stand in the polls? In the Tory leadership race, one of the final three candidates will be knocked out today. Do any of them have what it takes to restore the party's fortunes? And Keir Starmer will face Rishi Sunak for PMQ's Live at Midday. Joining me, Labour MP James Frith, Conservative MP Lincoln Jopp, former government advisor Salma Shah and Ava Santina Evans from Politics Joe. This is Politics Live. Hello and welcome. Let's start with the front page of The Guardian and this headline. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, presses ahead, it says, with plans to borrow billions for investment. It's reporting strong indication that the Chancellor is going to borrow more at the budget than she had so far said for capital expenditure, infrastructure and assets, tweaking what is known in politics as the fiscal rules guiding, on one hand, investment. My opening question to the panel, starting with you, James Frith, is can the government afford to borrow more?
I think the country is crying out for public investment, and Rachel Reeves recognises that. I'm pleased to hear of that intention. We'll wait to see what the budget says, but capital investment is an important part of government, taken then with the changes to everyday living and improving making work pay. Taken together means that we're serious about the investment, the infrastructure, to the point you're talking, as well as improving the money in people's pockets as well. Taken together, that's a serious plan for government. Good idea, borrow more?
Well, Rachel Reeves said her plans were fully funded and that she wouldn't fiddle with the way in which debt was calculated. And so it's disappointing to read about it on the front page of The Guardian rather than hearing about it in Parliament, but I guess we'll see what she brings forward. Disappointing, but is it a good idea? There are other ways of raising money for investment in infrastructure, and we won't go into them now, but we could be using the amazing potential of our pension schemes in terms of infrastructure investment in this country far better.
Salma, what do you make of the planned or the reported plan to tweak the rules and take certain things off the balance sheet, if you like, so that Rachel Reeves has more room to manoeuvre in borrowing?
So I think it's interesting, and it's not something that's alien to governments.
No.
Because, you know, the Tories have attempted to do this previously. And indeed, looking at how you borrow to invest is something that I know that my former boss, even though I didn't work for him in the Treasury, was looking at when ahead of his first budget. However, when they were looking at it, we had interest rates at a record low. So if she is going to borrow, the climate outside actually means that servicing that debt is going to cost a lot more. And so one has to think about the balance. But also, what does she mean, and what does anybody mean when they say this, borrowing to invest in assets? So are we talking about hospitals and schools? If that's the case, then yes, you can define it as such, but it's not like you can sell those things afterwards. So actually realising that, what that means in terms of the way that you borrow, I think has to be a little bit more open and transparent, because, you know, putting something into infrastructure that might increase productivity, might increase growth, I think it's something that Conservatives could get on board with. But if it's about spending that doesn't actually give you a return, that's a bit more difficult. Well,
before I come to you then, Ava, on the point being made by Salma, it is the price of servicing that, or the cost of servicing that debt, because debt interest is rising. City AM, gilt yields, which is a form of borrowing by the government, rise ahead of budget as Chancellor Reeves set to increase borrowing. So the question is, can the government afford to borrow more?
I don't really buy this argument about, we should, pander to the markets the entire time, because the markets are spooked no matter what you do. And,
although Liz Truss found to her...
different case altogether, right?
But but the markets were spooked, weren't they?
Let's talk about investment and talk about the case for investment. During the election, I went up to Teesside and I looked at the free port that has been put on there. The jobs that were promised by the Conservative government have not been actualised. They've not been realised. The area is devastated by a lack of investment, and that was entirely done privately with a small subsidy from the government. That, to me, is a case for public investment, for proper public ownership of and creating jobs, creating wealth in a way that we haven't seen for the last 14 years.
Lincoln, do you agree with that? Is that a powerful enough case to take on the rising cost of borrowing?
Again, to come back to the gilt yields point and the Liz Truss mini-budget, 3 days before the mini-budget, gilt yields blew out. And so we're seeing a similar thing in advance of this budget.
Although, remember, Liz Truss, of course, was offering and planning massive tax cuts.
Indeed. And the market sort of reads what's happening ahead of time, for sure. In terms of making productive investment in infrastructure, I was 10 years in private equity, and we were looking at a number of different plans and schemes, some of which got off the ground, some of which didn't, but they would have brought green energy to this country at a lower price than we currently could, and it would have meant thousands of jobs in the northeast. We struggled, I have to say, with both the government and the regulators in order to get it done. So it's finding that sweet spot between private money, government support, and also the right regulatory environment in order to get growth going.
That's not easy, because ultimately you can start with the principle, let's borrow to invest. Nobody wants to be against that. Sounds perfectly reasonable. But the devil is in the detail. What are you actually investing in? Will it give you the return? And who's managing that?
Well, to say we will have a full programme on Budget Day on October the 30th, covering everything, all the detail from Rachel Reeves, starting at 11:15, and we'll have the first government and opposition reaction. It is different to what Rachel Reeves and Labour said during the election in terms of what they would do, rightly or wrongly, sticking to what they called the fiscal rules.
Rachel Reeves has always said that we wouldn't borrow for day-to-day spending, and that hasn't changed. Clearly, the investment point, the argument that you're making, is about avoiding spooking the markets. The work that has been done, I'm sat next to the man that replaced the architect of the disastrous mini-budget,
Kwasi Kwarteng,
is to ensure that we don't spook the markets by the work that has been done by Rachel Reeves, by Keir Starmer, by Johnny Reynolds, to ensure that we bring the markets with us and invest. As Salma says, the devil will be in the detail, but I hope we will see strong investment in the infrastructure that we're crying out for in towns like mine and regions like mine as well.
Yes, but Ava is right. It has changed since the election campaign and the beginning of government, and that in itself, Rachel Reeves has consistently said you would fix the economy through growth.
Yes.
Now she is saying we might need to, maybe we will be, borrowing more, maybe that's the right thing. That in itself, that change of position, could spook the markets.
I don't believe that's the case. I think we will see a very responsible Chancellor and a responsible budget on October the 30th, and I await that with bated breath. What we are seeing, though, with the first piece of legislation that came through, is this fiscal lock, is this budget responsibility commitment, and that as a bedrock to fix the foundations of a broken economy that we've inherited, this enormous black hole where the reserves have been spent 3 times over. The Labour Party's come in doing the responsible thing. The message is there is a £22 billion black hole.
But you have rode back from that line a little bit, because after that sort of disastrous speech that was given in the Rose Garden and the public reception to that speech, the Labour Party have rode back. You started hearing the Chancellor at conference talking about actually we do need to invest, and actually, perhaps spending isn't such a bad idea, because they realise that that line of the £22 billion black hole was not sitting well with the public.
I think what you're talking about on content hasn't changed. The tone definitely has changed. There is a need. There is an argument for public investment. Of course there is. I think that's what we'll see on the budget.
Right. Well, Lincoln, do you accept previous Conservative government's fault has left an inheritance, yes, slightly separate, but still tied up, of a £22 billion hole? They can't do what they thought they could before the election.
I don't particularly buy it. The books were open before the general election. Everyone had full transparency of everything, including the Office of Budget Responsibility. And it does seem like a convenient reason to change.
All right, well, let's talk about workers' rights, because the Employment Rights Bill, which will give workers the rights to claim sick pay, maternity pay and protection against unfair dismissal from their first day in the job, that's certainly what's been billed, is going to come in tomorrow. Bosses will retain the power to sack unsatisfactory workers during probation periods, which have been shortened to 6 months. Now, the Labour government set themselves an ambitious timetable to do all of this, but let me just show you this in the Financial Times. Business seeks clearer timetable on UK worker rights overhaul. James, as far as you understand it, what is the timetable for these actually coming into force? This is the bill, this is the legislation, but actually coming into force.
Well, we'll see what is announced tomorrow. I'm not privy to that information. Clearly, a responsibility for Johnny Reynolds' department is to listen to both the pro-worker and the pro-business arguments for these transformative changes that we're proposing. We were elected on mission 1 of economic growth, and you achieve that by secure employment, but also being able for employers to access skilled labour. And I think that these changes are long overdue. It's about a new partnership with business. It's about being pro-worker and pro-business. And so the opportunity to respond to the consultation that the government will begin tomorrow in some of these changes is a welcome one. I've a history of working with business organisations, and there is always a degree of rhetoric versus reality. And I think the government is open-minded and is listening to business on this, just as we are listening to our union colleagues. Are
you welcoming these changes that will come in at some point?
I don't know how many people on the panel, forgive me, have started new businesses, but I can tell you it's a really precarious time. And I've been employee number 1, I've been the investor director, I've worked in a number of these fields, and it is, you know, you really want to move fast, but and you may want to make some mistakes. And let's face it, we've all hired someone who turned out to be, you know, not quite right. And, you know, Sue Gray would be a pretty good case in point. You want the flexibility to fire and rehire in her case. But we're going to denude small businesses of the ability to move fast.
No, we'll let James respond.
I've started my own small business. I think there's a sort of hijacking of the agenda. It's a misdirection, I think. In the event people need to be let go, if in the event people want to leave their employment, these won't change. Unfairness is unfairness on day 1 or year 2. What we believe is that the probation period is too long. That will go out into consultation. But this is about enhancing employment, improving security at work, which itself is a measure for productivity, because if you're secure in employment, secure in work, you're going to go and spend some of your money on the high street.
It's about fairly dismissing someone.
The danger is, with all these things, that they're going to put their foot in the accelerator and pull the handbrake on at exactly the same time, and it's not going to achieve the growth that people want. And part of this measure, which has been put back into the latter part of this government, is the reform of these employment tribunals, which is where these cases will go when you've employed someone on day 1 and they're going for unfair dismissal on week 3, and then they're there into an employment tribunal, and there's already delay in that system, which is why the government said they were going to reform it. And all of this stuff is just going to act as a bit of a sea anchor on growth, I fear.
Do you understand those concerns?
Well, but the probation period would still be there. It's not that you.
But it would be 6 months. It wouldn't be 2 years.
Sure.
It is about what they call fair dismissal. But is it going to act as a brake as well as an accelerator?
The moral case for that is that means that someone can have a stable job and a stable income. You were just talking there about fire and rehire. Now, I understand the principle of fire and rehire is that actually someone's become too expensive for you, so you sack them and then you bring in someone cheaper. I don't think that that's a particularly moral way to run a business, and it's not actually very good for the local economy, because if you've constantly got people suddenly one moment with a salary, suddenly one moment without, then they're not going to be spending in the local area. And if you're thinking of long-term sort of macro growth, that's not going to be particularly helpful, is it?
It was just a simple way of taking a cheap shot at the fact that Keir Starmer had hired the wrong person in Sue Gray.
Well, we're not here for cheap shots, but certainly the fiery hire point is well made. I'd go further than that and point out that very often fire and rehire applies to the same people, the same workforce are being asked to adopt terms and conditions that are unfair. But because they've been let go and then brought back in, they're expected to absorb them. That's not right.
But will it boost the economy? Will these changes grow the economy, help the economy improve?
I think it's going to compound a bad situation for the economy that exists currently. So I understand that we want to talk about business versus employer in this particular issue. I don't think good, responsible businesses would balk at this as a way to support their team and their staff. Most businesses, most good businesses in the UK want to have a happy workforce. The issue is that on the other side of the ledger, when it comes to what Johnny Reynolds is doing versus what Rachel Reeves is doing, there doesn't seem to be the light and shade. So, you know, on top of having workers' rights coming down the track, which will be a cost to business and particularly small business, there isn't anything on the other side that says here's going to be some kind of tax break, here's going to be some kind of support for you as businesses that will help your growth. So it just feels imbalanced.
Yeah, what do you say to that, Ava? Does there need to be some sort of perk, if you like, for business on the other side?
I think that there might be a case in terms of actually something that Kemi Badenoch spoke about, which was maternity pay. I do think there's actually probably a point in there that small businesses should have access to potentially a tax break or a perk in order to get more women into the workforce. But I think in terms of like this sort of, oh, we're going to spook business and you're going to shut everything down, it sort of reminds me of the argument we had when Labour first introduced minimum wage. And, you know, we were told by many different organisations that actually this would have a dire effect on the economy. And look, years later, it's probably one of the best things that ever came into place.
Well, as the special advisor that we worked on introducing the living wage, I would concur with that. I don't think that that is a particularly kind of like divisible thing between worker or business. You know, there are things that people need to do in order to create productivity in the economy. Absolutely. On the maternity point, that is about pushing certain types of behaviour to get more women in the workforce. That might be a really good thing to do. I haven't seen any research on it. But this is about the larger economic growth and the fact that business is really struggling. We have real low capacity for private capital coming into the country. Our share prices are incredibly low in comparison to international standards. We are not getting the growth that we need. So if the budget is going to deliver for business, it's not just about balancing, you know, what happens with workers' rights. It's about balancing the headwinds that business is facing.
But I don't know what that's got to do with what we're talking about, because what we're talking about is a business's inability to sack someone unfairly, which is entirely different from what investment is coming in.
Because
I mean, and at the moment also, if you are a small business, it's actually very difficult to fire someone anyway, even under the current rules. So it's not this drastic change that we're all, you know, sort of elevating it to.
So the impact that you have on a business in terms of being able to move people around, what that costs you on the balance sheet is what we're talking about here. So if you're restricted in terms of capital, which is any regulation brings that in, then that means you don't have as much money to invest. And if you don't have money to invest, then that hampers growth.
James?
And if you don't have capital, if it's not coming in through a different means, and you don't have any on your balance sheet, it restricts your ability to grow.
But Summer, you talked about what Johnny Reynolds is doing and what the Chancellor is doing. We've got this enormous summit this next week around business investment and capital injection into the economy. I don't know if you're talking about access to capital as a small business. I would agree, actually. We need our small businesses reaching for seed funding or for scale-up funding.
All businesses are struggling with access to capital.
For sure, which is why we need that injection. I think the summit next week.
Well, let's have a look at this political point. Lincoln, The Guardian says Labour's workers' rights plans can win over Tory and Reform voters, says the TUC. Has he got a point?
I haven't seen the argumentation underneath the TUC's assertion. The thing which will win over people to any particular party is to establish that you've got credibility for running the economy. and we'll see whether Labour can establish that. And we've got quite a way to go to re-establish our credibility in that respect.
Right. I mean, Paul Novak, the TUC's General Secretary, says the government's plan to make work pay delivered in full would improve incomes and the quality of work across Britain, and that would be extremely popular with, well, probably all voters, but Tory and Reform voters particularly.
I think if you can, and we'll come on to immigration in a minute, if you can find a way to make this country more productive and more fulfilling with more people in work, then you'll get a vote for sure.
I mean, do you think the debate about union laws, Salma, particularly from the Conservatives during the election, talking about French-style union laws, did that land here particularly in terms of a critique?
I mean, the problem is you've got to have some kind of understanding of French union laws, and I don't think even I do. But I think going back to that headline, I think that lots of people do feel like work doesn't pay, and there has been real terms stagnation in wages. It was part of the reason when I was in the business department, we introduced things like the apprenticeship levy, we introduced things like the living wage, because, you know, that cannot be consistently sustainable. But I do think that in order to progress this agenda, progress productivity, there are other things that we also need to look at, whether it's technology, whether it's kind of rights around maternity, that really need to increase that productivity as well.
We've got 9.25 million people in this country aged between 16 and 64 who are neither in work nor looking for work. That must mean that the benefits of being in work compared to the disbenefits of being out of work is too narrow. And so we need to...
So this might work then, encouraging people.
It's part of the inheritance that the Labour government's had, isn't it? I mean, I think that's strong analysis, in fairness. We do need to get people into work, but we do need to make work pay. I think that's well put.
Well, let Lincoln finish his point.
So we want people to make employing more people, taking on more staff, more and more attractive, because I want fewer people on that list of 9.25 million. My concern is that if you constrain too much the entrepreneurial spirit, the risk envelope of all of our companies to the extent that they are shy of taking on the people that they need to generate the growth we need, then that's a concern.
I mean, just very briefly before we go, but maybe they'll invest it in machinery, equipment. That might boost productivity more.
Well, possibly. I mean, we can talk about AI another time, but that's a whole other concern for workers. But I would love to know, what is actually the issue with workers having more rights? Because I understand you're saying it's difficult to sort of get rid of people at whim. That doesn't sound very kind.
That's not my particular concern. I think the fact that we are foreshortening the ability to make a mistake in terms of employing someone, and people do that, and so it wasn't just a cheap shot at Keir Starmer and Sue Gray. We want people to have a risk envelope which is set at a particular way so that they take people off that 9.25 million list. And if people think that they're going to get wrapped up in employment tribunals from day one, if they think that they've got to make people flexible workers as a matter of default, then I don't think people can grow the workforce that they necessarily want.
There is that many people now who aren't in work under the current rules. So why would more regulation affect that?
But it's not bringing the list down. That's the issue.
It's
actually it makes it well, but from regression modelling, from introduction of regulation like this previously, I think it's a legitimate concern. I don't think anybody, like I said, I don't think anybody is against the rights per se. It's about how you balance that when you're also asking businesses to create growth. So yes, keep those rights, introduce them, bring that legislation forward. But what else are you doing to stimulate growth at the same time?
And we're going to talk even more, people would be delighted to know, about this tomorrow when the bill is introduced in Parliament. Let's have a look at the front page here of The Times, reporting new figures from the Office for National Statistics. Migration fuels record rise in UK population. Yes, it's a surge in net migration that drove the fastest population rise for about 53 years. It was driven entirely, or almost entirely, by net migration because more people died than were born in Britain for the first time in 50 years, according to the ONS. Let's talk about these figures with Dr. Ben Brindle from the Migration Observatory at Oxford University. Hello to you. Talk us through these figures, Ben.
Yeah, morning. So, I mean, on the one hand, these population estimates sort of sound quite exciting. This is the first time, outside of the pandemic, for example, that the number of deaths in the UK has been higher than the number of births. But actually, if we take sort of a slightly sort of longer perspective and sort of look over the past 2 decades, net migration, that's the number of people coming to the UK minus the number of people leaving. That's actually been the main driver of population growth sort of since like 2004. It's accounted for about sort of 60% of population growth. Now, maybe what's sort of interesting about figures released yesterday is that this rate of population growth has been higher than it has been previously. But these figures are sort of something of an anomaly. You know, the reason they are high is because net migration has been high because various factors have come together at the same time. But actually, when we look at visa data and sort of early indications like this, it suggests that net migration is coming down from its peak in 2022 and actually could come down quite sizably. And that will mean that in sort of future population estimates, the rate of population change due to migration should be lower than what we saw yesterday.
Right, and the government, the last Conservative government, announced plans or sort of 5 points to bring down the level of migration into the UK. Let's just pick up on something the Conservative leadership candidate, you heard in the headlines, Robert Jenrick, said in his conference speech, that the age of mass migration, he said, must end. It's not making us any richer and putting pressure on housing, hospitals and roads. What are your thoughts, Ben, on that?
Yeah, so I think there's sort of two sort of important points here. The first is that there is no sort of right level of migration, and increasing or reducing migration isn't inherently beneficial or inherently damaging. So while there are some areas such as housing, for example, where more people coming to the UK will probably contribute to higher costs, particularly in sort of the rental market, in lots of other areas, what's sort of more important is about who is coming to the UK and what they are doing while they're in the UK. So let's take sort of the UK's public finances, for example. Now, overall, migrants pay in about as much to the public finances as they take out through the use of public services. But there are differences between different groups of migrants on different visa routes. So, and in fact, actually just last week, the Home Office did an economic analysis or released an economic analysis of some of those policy changes that came into force earlier this year. And they found, for example, that by restricting the number of student dependents or student partners from coming to the UK, that could have an economic benefit because these people are less likely to be in work and particularly less likely to be in sort of the high skill, high paying jobs, which are most beneficial for the public finances. On the other hand, at sort of the same time, if international students themselves are put off, then that could have quite a large economic cost because these people tend to pay quite large tuition fees and then sort of leave the UK often sort of after a few years. So it very much depends on the question of who, not just how many. All
right, well, Ben, stay with us. Lincoln, do you agree with your colleague, Robert Jenrick, who is standing to be the next Conservative leader, that immigration is not making us richer and should come down to 100,000 or below a year?
I think he was talking about the overall picture. So there are, as Dr. Ben's just said, there are certain people who do come to this country, the brightest and the best, who all these immigrants coming over here creating our jobs. You know, they do an amazing piece of work in terms of job creation and value added to the UK economy. I think that let me tell a slightly personal aside. So I've never really understood. One of my children went to work in America. In order to get that job in America, the job had to be advertised in America and there to be no takers or no qualified takers. And they also had to prove that they couldn't walk out onto 150 Van Ness High Street in San Francisco and find her. And part of the way in which they did that was the very high rate of pay that she was being offered to move from the UK to come to here. We seem to have taken a complete diametrically opposed approach by saying to a UK employer, if you can find someone at 80% of the wage at which you can employ someone in Britain, then you can go to the Philippines and get them in. And I just don't understand why, if we want to become a high skill, high wage, high quality economy, why we have, why we didn't frankly go further and faster when we were in government.
All right.
And that, to my mind, is the way in which to manage this going forward.
Right. The Labour government wants to bring down net migration figures too. Why?
Look, we need an economic-led migration policy, and there needs to be good. There needs to be good.
What does that mean?
There needs to be good reason why people come here, and those good reasons need to be determined by what we need as an economy, which is where the growth areas are for the economy, where there is a skills shortage. Now, a government that was in charge could have put a plan in place to ensure that those already here got the skills to do the work that we were currently importing migrant Labour to do. We should not expect businesses and growing industries to wait for a plan to be delivered, but we do need a plan. So Skills England, I'm coming to the point, the Skills England will go some way in ensuring that understanding where the gaps are in the industry, where the skills for the future are, a plan for the future. In terms of bringing migration down, I welcome the contribution by your guests. From what I can hear, it is currently at its highest, but it's coming down, and the net contribution is a positive one that they make. That's terrific. But those people out of work that you were just talking about, some of them are being kept out of work because we haven't given them the skills to get into the workplace.
Right, but do you agree with Robert Jenrick, which is the question, that immigration does not make us richer?
I don't agree with that whatsoever.
So you're saying it does?
And I think he is disqualified. Having been at the wheel, he could have done all the things he's now playing to a rump of Conservative membership in proclaiming to want to do. He could have done when he was actually in charge of immigration.
Lincoln?
Well, I've heard, as you can imagine, I've heard all 3, 4, 5, 6 candidates shtick quite a few times over the last month.
Are you saying you're getting fed up with it?
And so what I can tell you is that if Robert were sitting here, he would say he was frustrated as the immigration minister to the extent that he could not do what he wanted to do, which is why he resigned.
Right. So why are you keeping the government, or why is government keeping the Conservative plans to bring down net migration?
Well, we're saying migration should come down over time, but it should be an economic cause as opposed to the sort of rhetoric, the unhealthy rhetoric. You know, Robert Jenrick, I think, has since apologised, but a man who came in and told children's bedrooms needed to not have any kind of colourful wallpaper on. This is really disingenuous, and the rhetoric has got to be toned down. We need a much more constructive debate about migration. Absolutely embracing some of the concerns and anxieties that exist around this issue, but with a credible plan.
But you are keeping James Cleverly and Robert Jenrick's plan. Take your point about the rhetoric. Well, look at the Financial Times headline. UK government unveils measures to cut immigration by 300,000 a year. Salary threshold for skilled workers to rise following sharp increase in number of people moving to the country last year. The 5 points are here in front of me. You're keeping them all.
Yeah, we have said it should come down. We wouldn't be drawn on an annual target. We don't believe that to be the right focus, because if businesses need migrant labour, then we've got a duty as a government to A, make that available, and B, have a sustainable alternative for the people already here.
Right, but you're keeping their policies.
We're not keeping that. Well,
you are under the social care. Well, the only thing you're not doing, rather than go through all 5 of them, is you're not at the moment increasing the skilled worker visa salary requirement to go up to what the government had proposed, which was to 38,700, an increase of almost 50%. But the rest you're keeping.
It seems eminently sensible to me that for example, you nearly mentioned it, the social care.
Yes.
Why on earth would we tell mums and dads around the country that their mums and dads can no longer be looked after properly by the migrant labour currently caring for them because of some rhetoric or expectation from a Conservative candidate for leader who doesn't look like
James, it's perfectly OK for you to say, look, these are good ideas. They're going to bring migration down by 300,000. So we'll keep those in place while we have some good ideas of our own.
What's important is delivery, not gimmicks. We scrapped the Rwanda plan, which was a gimmick. You sent more Home Secretaries than asylum seekers to
I think you'll find that's illegal immigration. We're talking about
and we're talking about the legal migration. But let me bring you in. I mean, is it good for the economy or not, Salma, in terms of...
There you go.
Well, I'm just wondering, there seems to be an inconsistency in your argument, because you've just set out your case for small businesses and other businesses. They need to have access to labour. You now want to cut off that stream of labour. Which side of it do you fall? Surely small businesses aren't going to be particularly happy if suddenly a whole stream of people, potential employees, are cut off. I mean, look what happened to the farming industry.
I'm saying
they were relying on migrant workers who would come here for maybe a season and then they would go back to Europe afterwards. And that industry has been decimated because they can't find the people to work on those farms. So, what businesses do you care about?
I care about the ones who are going to produce a compelling offer to some of the 9.25 million people currently not in work and nor looking for work.
But they're not working in those areas where there are currently shortfalls, are there? So you're just going to see the collapse of many other businesses, surely?
Well, I think there's going to be a cost to business, and if we look at the care sector, so I've got a technical college in my constituency. They can churn out than they do, 500 qualified builders a year and 260 building apprenticeships. The one they can't get anyone to join is the care one, the
because
NHS
you keep
one.
calling it unskilled work. You keep.
I didn't call it unskilled work.
No, the Conservatives spent a long time talking about how it wasn't a skilled job. So it's not exactly, it's not a career you want to leap into.
I think that's a question about how the economy has defined it, and I think that there is a cause, especially to kind of like increase salary around skilled workers. But I've got to say, having done this policy in the Home Office, it really does make me laugh, because in the Financial Times, if you look at that figure, if you raise the salary threshold alongside inflation, actually it's not going to change very much, and you're probably going to end up with the same number of people. So it's this idea that if you tweak something in Whitehall, somehow it's going to make some kind of difference in the real economy. So I'd be intrigued to see what the numbers look like once this measure is brought forward. But also, on the Robert Jenrick side, I mean, God, I thought Brexit was supposed to solve all this, the end of freedom of movement. And, on the seasonal agricultural workers, we introduced a bill to deal with this exact problem. It would be interesting to see what the Labour government's going to do in order to plug those gaps, because right now there isn't anything that suggests that actually the way that we look and tweak at those skills and those visas is going to change.
Let me plug again. We've got a budget programme on October the 30th where all of this may be unveiled. And you may even be on the programme. Who knows? Ben, just finally, do you have anything to say, listening to everyone here on the panel?
Yeah, I think that migration is certainly one way of filling vacancies, but it's not the only way. So there are other things that the government can do. Take the care sector, for example. The Migration Advisory Committee, when they recommended that care workers were added to the work migration route, they also recommended that pay and working conditions were improved, because they said that this would make those roles more attractive to people who are already in the UK, and therefore sort of reduce the extent to which migration was needed. So migration can be part of the solution, but it's not sort of necessary. It's not the only solution.
Dr. Ben Brindle, thank you very much for joining us. Let's have a look inside the Commons chamber, filling up for the first Prime Minister's questions since the party conferences. We'll be going there in about 8 or 9 minutes' time for Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister versus Leader of the Opposition. For now, Rishi Sunak. Let's introduce Kelly Beaver, who's the Chief Executive of Ipsos Mori, and talk about the state of the parties. Welcome to you. Kelly, there's been lots of discussion about Labour and Keir Starmer's popularity since becoming Prime Minister. What are the polls saying?
Well, we have to remember that when Labour came to power to govern, they were not particularly embattled with public enthusiasm. So what we're seeing now is that has started to wane quite substantively, and we're seeing over half the population now, or the public, saying that they believe that they're disappointed with what they've seen Labour do in government so far. And you can see that feeding through in how they feel about Keir Starmer himself as well. So similar sort of proportions are also saying that they're not necessarily favourable towards Keir Starmer himself, and his net approval rating has declined since he took the role as Prime Minister. So lots of pressure on both Labour and public perceptions of them, but also of Keir Starmer.
Right, what's driving that, Kelly?
Well, there are a number of things. One is around, we have seen quite not a positive public reaction, more of a negative public reaction to the winter fuel allowance debate. You can see that feeding through in particular to the older proportion of voters. But even amongst those who voted Labour themselves during the election, a quarter say that they feel disappointed, and we see high proportions saying that they are disappointed with that particular arrangement. But it's not just that. Some of the freebies scandal does appear to have cut through, in particular around Keir Starmer and the perceptions of him. And you can see that feeding through to his own approval ratings. So it's a number of things.
Let's turn to the Conservative leadership contest, because they're going to go from 3 to 2 later on today. Can you tell us what the polls are saying about the candidates and the party?
Yeah, now, of course, the public don't make the decision here. This will be the party members themselves, but it is worth thinking, as they will be thinking, about how the public will react to any of the candidates that are being put forward. And at the minute, looking at how the MPs are feeling, we know that they are more favourable towards Cleverly, and then, Jenrick and Badenoch are pretty much neck and neck in some of the latest voting amongst Conservative MPs. It does reflect similarly what we're seeing when we ask the general public. Cleverly did receive a bit of a post-conference boost when we ask people about whether who they think is most likely to become PM. He had the higher proportion. But none of them really have a particularly high proportion, and it's worth remembering the extent to which the public are feeling a sense of apathy towards the Conservative Party at the minute. So reality check, 2 in 3 people say they don't personally care who becomes the next leader of the Conservative Party.
All right, Kelly Beaver, thank you very much for joining us. Let's return to Labour and Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister. Are you worried, James, by the rapid drop in popularity?
I'm not worried about that, no. I think we've got the budget on October 30th and the messenger is rarely the most popular person in the room. And as a Labour government, we've come in, we've told the country what we believe needs to happen, as well as what we have inherited. I would ask that we just suspend judgment ahead of budget, and actually delivery is what matters. I mean, I concur with people's lack of faith in politics. The apathy is very real. I take that very seriously.
Yeah, but what about the cut-through, Kelly Beaver said, about the row over gifts and freebies? Let's have a look at this news headline. Starmer repays, this is the news this week, more than £6,000 in gifts after donations, Raoul, since becoming Prime Minister. These are things that he and the government have done as well when it comes to cutting the winter fuel payment. Putting that to one side, the response to the gifts and donations route, it's cut through.
It has cut through, and Keir Starmer's taken the decision to repay that money. Indeed, in assessing our politics, he's going to tighten up the regs for ministers taking gifts or invitations, and takes that very seriously.
Yeah,
he understood it.
Well, he only understood it after there was a massive backlash.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of a wider conversation to have about invitations in a kind of dignitary sense. If Universal, I think, were the gifts, if they wanted the future Prime Minister or the current Prime Minister, I don't know whether it was the timing of it as such, to go and see an incredible music event in our country. You know, whether in fact we want to lock our Prime Minister away as opposed to showing off some of the best bits about why living in Britain is so good, I don't think this is as important as some of the other stuff coming down the track.
No, and it's certainly not a Labour problem, is it, Lincoln? Boris Johnson, talking about not locking himself away, registered over £20,000 in 2022 for his wedding party in the Cotswolds, a £15,000 holiday to Mustique in 2019, and a free trip to Marbella on behalf of the ex-Tory MP, Lord Zach Goldsmith. Really, Tories haven't got a leg to stand on, have they?
Look, the Labour Party took power on a platform of literally holier than thou. And they said that they were going to clean up Dodge. And I'm afraid, you know, my powers of reading the Sun headline upside down on your desk say that Yvette Cooper lent on the Met Police in order to give Taylor Swift a security cavalcade in order to make sure she toured in this country to a thing that they were all getting free tickets to. That's awful. And it's absolutely dreadful. To my mind, that the leadership contest can't go on long enough, because for all the time we haven't had a leader...
that's a very rare view to be expressing. You'd like it to go on longer.
Genuinely, we've won 8 by-elections in local government. We've said goodbye to Sue Gray as the Chief of Staff, and we're within a point of Labour. So long may it continue.
James?
Look, the Conservative Party can carry on with their drama and their sort of comfort zone politics. It was evident in the chamber yesterday. They are talking to themselves alone. They're not talking to the country. I'm not spooked by, I understand it, but I'm not spooked by this latest polling. We've got to get on with delivery. On the point about disclosure, this is because of disclosure and the transparency and playing by the rules that we're having this conversation. You know, Keir Starmer, as with every other Labour MP, to my knowledge, has done the right thing in being above board.
Well, it's all about transparency.
This is where it gets tricky, because I don't think the actual donations matter, but it's who made the donation. That's what matters. So when we've been talking about Lord Ali, who was then given a Downing Street pass, that's consequential. And then if we're also then talking about who took Keir Starmer to one of those football games, it was the Premier League. And the Premier League are about to be potentially regulated by this Labour government. That is where you run into an issue.
Right.
The idea, though, that a programme of government elected with a significant mandate written into a manifesto is going to be swung on the basis of having some time at a football match, one instance. No, but it's quite a serious suggestion.
It is, but it depends who he's gone with. I don't care if Arsenal give them a boss.
That's the reason for transparency. That is entirely the reason, because yes, we live in a free society where people are allowed to lobby their government and allowed to make cases. The reason for transparency is that you shouldn't be allowed to put yourself above because you can pay for it. That's why the lobby is open. That's why anybody in the country can walk into the lobby and lobby their member of parliament, or indeed peers, if that is necessary. And I agree with the point on transparency, and that's fine. The rules are the rules, but you have to accept that people feel a certain way about it when they read that.
What does it mean, though, when Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, said he thinks we need to have principles of general application? I mean, it's just a word salad, really, isn't it? It's like, you know, if you took the tickets, take the tickets and own the tickets. He's sort of prevaricated about sort of paying back, £6,000 for things. There was obviously a big list when it all came out in transparency. I don't really know what he's saying with this about general application. The rules are the rules; they exist already. Right, but if they're sticking within the rules, then it must be about the optics.
Yeah.
Well, I think transparency is the point I would make. The judgment is about repaying is Keir Starmer's to make, and that's absolutely fine by me. It is about transparency, and the conversation only exists because he's been above board and transparent.
We've just seen the Prime Minister come in with Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, for PMQs. Before we go into the chamber, Lincoln, who are you backing in the Tory leadership?
Do you know what? I haven't even told my wife.
Oh, really? Is it that big a secret?
It really is.
Why?
I think there's merit in not declaring.
All right, well, let's go inside the chamber for PMQs on that note.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, this House marked the one-year anniversary of the horrific attacks on October the 7th. And I take this opportunity to reiterate that the hostages must be released. And I reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon. Mr. Speaker, this week the government will deliver on our promise to the British people of the biggest upgrade to workers' rights in a generation. The Employment Rights Bill will ensure work pays, it'll forge a new partnership with business and reset the dreadful industrial relations that have cost our economy and our NHS so much in recent years. We are also preparing for the International Investment Summit next week, bringing hundreds of global CEOs to the UK and unlocking billions of pounds in investment. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The commitment of £400 million in funding for a new hospital at Watford General was one of the many brilliant things of the previous Conservative government. And my good friend, the former Member of Parliament for Watford, Dean Russell, did, and would have been life-changing as well as life-saving for so many of my constituents. Why is the Prime Minister cancelling this funding commitment and spending billions of pounds giving pay rises to train drivers instead?
Prime Minister. Because the promise of 40 new hospitals didn't involve 40, didn't involve hospitals, they weren't new and they weren't funded.
Senator Combs.
One of the biggest issues in my West Bromwich constituency is poor access to GP services. Our GP satisfaction rate is 15% below the national average. So can I thank the government for their focus on improving this situation and ask the Prime Minister what the government's doing to make sure that everyone in West Bromwich can actually see their GP?
Well, I thank her for her question. The most visible sign of failure of the last government was the NHS. And we are going to expand the role of community pharmacies and accelerate the rollout of independent prescribers. We need much more care to be delivered in local communities to spot problems earlier, and we'll train thousands more GPs. We were elected to change the country, and that means getting the NHS back on its feet. And my honourable friend, the Chancellor, will have much more to say about that in the budget, about fixing the foundations of our economy so we can put money in people's pockets, fix our public services and rebuild Britain.
Leader of the Opposition, Rishi Sunak.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow the government will publish their anticipated changes to employment law. Given the weekend's events, given the weekend's events, when did the Prime Minister first become a convert to fire and rehire?
Well, I'm very pleased and proud that tomorrow we will publish the bill which will be the biggest upgrade of workers' rights in a generation. And that'll do two things, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, it will give people basic dignity at work. And secondly, it will help grow our economy, something that the last government absolutely failed on for 14 long years.
The opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when he talks about security at work, once again, it's one rule for him and another rule for everyone else. But I know that not everything or everyone has survived his first 100 days in government. So can he confirm that when he promised not to raise income tax, national insurance or VAT, that commitment applies to both employer and employee national insurance contributions?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, as he well knows, I'm not going to get drawn on decisions that will be set out. We made an absolute commitment in relation to not raising tax on working people. He, of course, was the expert's expert on raising taxes. And what did we get in return for it? We got a broken economy, broken public services, and a £22 billion black hole in the economy. We're here to stabilise the economy, and we will do so.
Leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think even Lord Ali is buying any of that nonsense. But I'm not asking. Mr. Speaker, I'm not asking about the budget. I'm not asking about the budget. I'm asking specifically. I'm asking specifically about the promise he made to the British people. So let me ask him again, just to clarify his own promise. Does his commitment not to raise national insurance apply to both employee and employer national insurance contributions?
We set out our promises in our manifesto. We returned with a huge majority to change the country for the better. And I stick to my promises in the manifesto. But I notice it's question 3, and it hasn't yet welcomed the investment into this country. We've had in recent months £8 billion from Amazon for jobs across the country. £10 billion from Blackstone's jobs across the North East. £22 billion on carbon capture jobs in the North East and the North West. 500 million, Mr. Speaker, for UK buses in Northern Ireland. While we're investing in our economy, what are they doing? They're arguing about whether to scrap maternity pay.
Leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to welcome investments that this government negotiated, but when it comes to his answer on tax, Mr. Speaker, businesses across the country would have found his answer just about as reassuring as Sue Gray did when he promised to protect her job, Mr. Speaker. So let me turn. It's no wonder confidence is plummeting on his watch, which he didn't mention. But turning to another commitment, before the election, his Chancellor said changing the debt target in the fiscal rules would be tantamount to fiddling the figures. Does he still agree with the Chancellor?
Prime Minister.
This is literally the man who was in charge of the economy. 14 years they crashed the economy. And what did they leave? A £22 billion black hole in the economy. Unlike them, we won't walk past it, we will fix it, and it's only because we're stabilising the economy that we are getting the investment into this country. But I still notice he hasn't really talked about that investment. We're powering ahead with clean British energy. We're changing the rules to build 1.5 million homes and returning railways to public ownership. And they've got nothing to say about any of this.
Mr. Speaker, on debt, we left them the second lowest debt in the G7, Mr. Speaker. And as the Institute of Fiscal Studies have said...
Order. I will hear the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, as the Institute of Fiscal Studies have said, it's hard to escape the suspicion that the government is attracted to this change because it would allow for significantly more borrowing. Now, his Chancellor previously said that this change, and I quote her words, would be fiddling the figures. So it is a simple question. Does he still agree with the Chancellor?
Prime Minister.
Well, I see it's back to his old script. They've never had it so good. That didn't work so well at the election. Might be time to change that. I'm not going to get drawn on issues for the budget, just as he wouldn't when he was standing at this dispatch box. But meanwhile, we're investing, we're building the NHS fit for the future, back on its feet, better opportunities for young people and protections at work. After 14 years of Tory failure, we're giving the country its future back. And that's the difference that Labour delivers.
Mr. Speaker, it is clear he's opened the door to raising employer national insurance contributions, including on pensions, and fiddling the figures that he can borrow more. And he talks about what he's achieved. Well, economic confidence is plummeting, growth is now stalling, and the UK's borrowing costs are rising on his watch, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, can I close on another important topic? Because yesterday's intervention from the head of MI5 will have been sobering for the whole House, and not least his warning that Britain faces the most complex and interconnected threats in our country's history. Now, I know the Prime Minister will agree with me that we all owe our security services a debt of gratitude for what they do to keep us safe. But can the Prime Minister confirm that the forthcoming terrorism bill will give our security services the powers they need to tackle evolving threats? And I can assure him of our constructive support on these vital questions of national security in the same spirit that he provided that support to me.
Prime Minister.
Well, I can confirm that we will give the security forces and services the powers that they need, and I hope that is a shared objective across the House. They do an incredibly important job for us. But he talks about the economy. It's a real shame the party opposite can't simply... Well, he did at the beginning of his question a moment ago. Listen on. It's a shame they can't celebrate Britain's success under this government. Of course we've got to take tough decisions. But when investment is pouring in, as it has been in recent weeks, when the NHS strikes are coming to an end, when houses are getting built, we're delivering the biggest upgrade of workers' rights in a generation. It's time for them to accept that we're fixing the foundations. So whilst they fight amongst themselves in the comfort zone of unfunded promises, threatening to scrap the minimum wage, we're going to get on with the job of clearing up the mess that they made and making a better country that people are crying out for.
Adam Jogi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, cancer is hard on the patient and it's hard on their families, as my family knows all too well this year. Can I ask the Prime Minister to commit to doing all he can to improve research, early diagnosis and patient care for those with cancer? And will he join me in thanking the NHS staff who've looked after my dad in recent weeks and thousands of cancer patients like him in Newcastle-on-Lyme and up and down our United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
I was sorry to hear about my honourable friend's father, and I think we would all pass him our best wishes. Cancer is another example of the dreadful state the last government left the NHS in. The Darzi report published just a few weeks ago showed that some cancer standards have not been met since 2015, and no progress was made in diagnosing cancer at stage 1 and stage 2 between 2013 and 2021. So I'm really pleased that we've just announced £6.4 million research network developing new AI software to identify cancer early. We will get the NHS catching cancer on time, diagnosing it earlier and treating it faster.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Across this House, we all agree that we need to get our economy growing strongly again so we can improve people's lives and raise the money for our public services. Liberal Democrats believe that one of the best ways of doing that is to improve our relationship with our European neighbours on things like trade, and I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister has made this a priority in his first few weeks. But what I just don't understand is that he's ruled out negotiating a youth mobility scheme with our European partners. This could be so good for young people, for businesses, and for re-establishing that relationship. So will he reconsider this?
Prime Minister.
Well, he's right. We do need a better deal with the EU than the bad deal we got under the last government. And that's why I was very pleased to meet the President of the Commission last week to talk about how we can improve on the deal. In our manifesto, we had clear red lines about the single market, customs union, freedom of movement, and we will negotiate with those red lines in place.
David. Well, I'm disappointed about the youth mobility scheme. Maybe we can come back to that. But he's right to say one of the many problems for our economy coming from the dreadful Brexit deal was the red tape that's been put on businesses. Now, there are many examples of that, Mr. Speaker, but a new example came to me earlier this week, and it affects fishermen in the Falklands, who are otherwise having to pay huge amounts in tariffs to be able to sell their produce into the European market, or sail under a Spanish flag. So when the Prime Minister renegotiates the trade deal, can you remember the overseas territories? And ensure that British citizens fishing off the Falklands can sail proudly under the Union Jack?
Prime Minister.
My uncle nearly lost his life when his ship was torpedoed defending the Falklands. They are British, and they will remain British. And sovereignty in Gibraltar is equally not to be negotiated. Of course, we will do everything we can to make it easier for all businesses to trade more freely so that we can grow our economy. I'm very, very clear about the Falklands. It's personal to me.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Conservative-led Derbyshire County Council are proposing to cut adult day centres and care homes across Derbyshire.
Yeah.
My constituent, Pat, was diagnosed with dementia in 2016. The Jubilee Centre in New Mills is a lifeline for her and her family. She always returns happier, less confused and less anxious. And for her partner David and main carer, it provides vital respite while she's there. They do not know how they'll survive without it. Will the Prime Minister join with me in asking the Conservatives on Derbyshire County Council to think again and oppose these devastating cuts to older people and their families?
Well, I'm shocked to hear of the impact on Derbyshire Council that he's just described, who are proposing cutbacks on adult social care. And councils across the country were at the front line of the last government's ruinous economic failure. It's left people who rely on services counting the cost. Now, there's no quick fix to this, but we will provide councils with more stability and certainty through multi-year funding settlements, ensuring councils can plan their finances for the future properly. And we will work with local leaders to deliver this.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Any sense of unease that though he is the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, there are over 300 areas of law in Northern Ireland where the legislation is made in a foreign parliament. Has the Prime Minister any ambition of recovering UK sovereignty over those 300 areas of law and thereby restoring the equal citizenships of my constituents and ending their disenfranchising in respect of making laws that govern much of their economy?
Prime Minister.
I thank you for raising that issue, which of course is an important issue. The Windsor framework was negotiated by the last government. We supported it, and we continue to support it, and will work to make sure it's implemented properly and fully.
Dave McHillier.
Mr. Speaker, 1 in 2 children in my constituency live in poverty after housing costs are taken into account. So I welcome the government's commitment to tackling child poverty. But we all know that every year of poverty has a long-term impact. So could the Prime Minister tell us that the welcome Child Poverty Task Force, which is underway, could he tell us when he expects that to report so we can see action?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for a very important question. It is appalling that child poverty went up 700,000 since 2010. And after the last Labour government did so much to bring it down, and tackling this is at the heart of our mission to break down the barriers to opportunity. The task force is developing the strategy to reduce child poverty, and it will be published in spring of next year.
Shabana Rajic.
Speak for Leicester. the Prime Minister's decision to impose VAT on independent schools strips hard-working families of the choice for what is best for their children, while risking job losses for teachers, increasing class sizes, and squeezing state school resources to their absolute limit. With these impending threats, what actions is the Prime Minister taking to mitigate these effects if he is not undertaking an impact assessment to understand them?
But I do understand that many parents across the country save hard to be able to send their children to private school because they have aspiration for their children. So does every parent who sends their children to a state school. And the problem we have is we don't have enough teachers in key subjects in our state secondary school. Now, the party opposite may be prepared to tolerate that. I'm not. And that's why we've made this change to fund 6,500 teachers. And they chunter on. But they have to answer the question, which none of them are answering. If they're not going to make this change, are they going to leave our state secondaries without the teachers they need? Or are they going to cut the education budget by £1.5 billion? Which is it?
Mr. Speaker, Gloucester has a proud military history, from the Battle of Imjin River to RAF Quedgley and the Glorious Gloucesters. In fact, almost 10% of Gloucester households are home to a veteran. So can the Prime Minister update this House on what this government is doing to support veterans, in particular how he will meet his promise to make sure that every veteran in Gloucester has a roof over their head?
Prime Minister. We owe an enormous debt to all of our veterans, and it was a great honour to announce at our party conference that our plans to build new homes across the country will ensure that homeless veterans are at the front line of the queue for new social housing, recognise the incredible sacrifice and contribution that they make. We will repay all those who served us and house all veterans in housing needs, ensuring homes are there for heroes. We're also ensuring veterans have access to support, including with mental health and employment.
Sir Julian Smith.
Mr. Speaker, special education needs budgets in North Yorkshire and across the UK are under huge pressure. Could I ask the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, as they prepare for the budget, could they look carefully at how increased funding and changes to the funding formula could make a massive difference to thousands of lives of children across the country?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable member for raising this issue, which is of real concern across the country to many parents who are concerned about the provision. And I do agree that children with special educational needs and disabilities are being failed, with parents struggling to get their children the support that they need and deserve. And we have to change that. I'm determined to raise standards for every child so they succeed in education. And we will work with the sector and across the House where we can to deliver on that mission, which is very important for many parents who will be watching this today.
Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Prime Minister's focus on economic growth, and I look forward to the International Investment Summit next week. One area where constituents across the country want to see thrive is their local high street, and the Prime Minister will know from his own visit to the top of town in Basingstoke that it has huge potential, but it's not what it could be. Could I ask the Prime Minister what support this government will give to ensure that high streets across the country are able to grow and thrive?
Prime Minister. Well, I do remember that visit, and here's the new political divide. Invest with Labour or decline with the Tories. And that's why I was very pleased to read out the investments we've had in the last few weeks. We've got a big summit coming up on Monday, hundreds of CEOs coming, and I'm confident we'll be making further such investment announcements in weeks to come. And that is what will fix our economy, stabilise our economy. It's because we're taking the tough decisions. The investment is now flowing into this country, fulfil on our obligation to raise living standards across the country.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The A483 runs through my constituency from Llanamannock to Oswestry, and it's one of the busiest and most dangerous roads in the constituency. And National Highways say that the crossroads at Llwnclwys is the worst accident black spot in the Midlands. They've got a proposal to improve the situation, but Treasury rules place a higher value on road speed than they do on the lives of North Shropshire's residents. So will the Prime Minister look at flexing these rules to back National Highways and back my residents to give them the safe road they deserve?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for raising this, and it's obviously a really big, important issue in her constituency. And it is vital that as we invest, we do improve safety and deliver better journeys for drivers. National Highways, I think, is continuing to study the case for safety improvements to the A483 and will continue to do so. Decisions, as you probably know, will be set out under the third road investment strategy. And I know that the Roads Minister will have heard her representations, and I'm sure will agree to a meeting if that is what you'd like.
Phil Brickle.
Bolton Hospice provides vital services to individuals with life-limiting conditions. Yet, like hospices across the country, it faces a difficult financial future and is reliant on fundraising, including the kind donations I was able to raise when I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro last year, and from the campaign run by the local paper, the Bolton News. Can the Prime Minister tell me what steps he is taking to ensure hospices like the one in Bolton are put on a sustainable financial footing?
Well, look, can I first congratulate him on his efforts in relation to the local hospice. We want everyone to have access to high-quality care and end-of-life care. And that is why we require all local NHS bodies to commission services from hospices to meet the needs of their local populations. Most hospices are charitable, independent organisations who also receive funding for providing NHS services. We have inherited a huge problem with the £22 billion black hole, but nonetheless, we are determined to move forward on this.
Mr. Speaker, since the signing of the Belfast Agreement in 1998, more people in Northern Ireland have now sadly lost their lives to suicide than those that were killed during the 30 years of the Troubles. Would the Prime Minister agree that the challenges with poor mental health in Northern Ireland, some of which are directly related to the violence of our past, is a unique and pressing legacy of the Troubles? So would he therefore commit to tasking his government to work collaboratively with the Department of Health in Northern Ireland to explore how these issues can be properly recognised and resolved?
Well, I thank him for raising this important issue. I do know firsthand the deep impact that the Troubles have had on so many in Northern Ireland, and we must ensure that those with mental health issues receive the support and the care that they need. Now, public services obviously devolved in Northern Ireland, but we will work with the executive and leaders to support them in delivering better outcomes, which is why my Secretary of State for Health spoke to the Health Minister in Northern Ireland in the first week he was in the department. And I'm sure that he'd be prepared to follow up should the honourable member wish so.
Joe Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency of Hexham, frightened parents and their families are having to fight tooth and nail and travel extremely long distances to secure fair treatment and full education for their children. Can the Prime Minister outline the steps that the government will take to improve outcomes and results for SEND families, particularly in the most rural parts of the North East?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for his question. I think this reinforces that the SEND provisions were a failure of the last government, particularly in rural communities. This has come from both sides of the House. It's a really important issue. We have a duty now to pick this up and to ensure that all children with SEND receive the right support to succeed in their education, and we will continue to do so.
David Davis.
On the assisted dying private members' bill, the government's quite rightly staying neutral. But the real issue with that bill is the time constraints of private legislation make it very difficult to get it right first time. If we get this wrong first time, the consequences are too terrible to contemplate. In 1967, the government today gave the government time to allow David Steele's abortion bill to go through. Would the Prime Minister commit to giving extra time, out of government time, to this bill to ensure that we get this right first time?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for raising this question on a really important issue. And I do understand there are strongly held views across the House and with, on both sides and within both sides, if I can put it in that way. I do agree with him that it is important that we ensure that any change to the law, if there is to be one, is effective. Now, if this House gives the bill a second reading, it will, of course, then go to the committee as usual, which will allow that more detailed scrutiny. But we do need the discussion more broadly on this important issue.
No law. With shared prosperity funding drawing to a close and Cornwall having some of the greatest potential in Europe in critical minerals and renewable energy, it's time for our aspiring Celtic tiger to identify much more strategic sources of investment funding which take us away from the short-termist begging bowl politics of the last decade. Will the Prime Minister meet with the Cornish MPs to discuss the future of industrial and social funding in Cornwall?
Minister. Well, my honourable friend is a proud Cornish MP and is absolutely right that economic growth must be spread across the country. It cannot simply be focused in the South East and London. And he'll have seen today, no doubt, the Floating Offshore Wind Task Force report, which sets out that the UK's industry can support tens of thousands of jobs, including huge opportunities, job opportunities in the South West. And I will ensure that a meeting is arranged with him, with the appropriate minister.
Wendy Chamberlain.
That affects thousands of children potentially across the UK. I first raised it in this chamber 18 months ago when I heard about the devastating impact from a constituent. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it should not be for a charity to fund the pathway analysis and research that is needed to ensure that people and children get the support that they need? And will he help facilitate a meeting for me with the charity and the Department for Health?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I first thank her for raising this important issue and reminding the House of the impact that it has. And certainly, I think I can arrange that meeting so we can take that further forward. Thank you.
Mary Kelly-Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constituents in the City of Durham are anxious about the financial situation at Durham County Council. The Tories' unfair funding formula has seen essential public services hollowed out, such as social care, whilst the demand is increasing. So what assurances can the Prime Minister give me that essential services will be restored and that a new funding formula will be genuinely a fair one, focusing on the needs of my constituents, especially the most vulnerable?
Prime Minister.
Well, she highlights yet another failing of the last government, because successive years of underfunding have left councils experiencing significant budget pressures, and that's felt by constituents and residents and individuals across the country. This government will clear up the mess, will get councils back on their feet. Partly, multi-year funding settlements will help to allow longer-term work to be done. But we recognise the importance of councils. They know their communities best, and with greater stability we can support them in ensuring the service that they provide gets to the people that need it.
Caroline Dinich.
Over 50 homes and businesses in Gosport found themselves underwater when Storm Pyrrhic hit. Some have still not been able to return to their properties, and it's now been upgraded to a 1 in 20-year risk. We still haven't had a decision from the Environment Agency about flood and coastal erosion risk management funding, which we've applied for. And despite requests, I still haven't been able to secure a meeting with his DEFRA team. Winter is coming. My constituents are worried. When is he going to grip this?
Prime Minister.
Well, look, this is a really important issue in terms of... Well, look, we're not going to take lessons from the party opposite. Year after year after year, we visited constituencies and areas which were flooded because there had been a failure to take adequate protection. So I won't take lectures. What I said in the election campaign is that we would set up a flood resilience task force to get ahead of this. We will do that, and I'll ensure that she can get such further information as she needs.
Dawn Butler, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. October is Black History Month, and the theme this year is reclaiming the narrative. I want to thank Mr. Speaker for the event that you will be doing in your apartments with the Temptations and the Prime Minister. The Temptations tribute band. And the Prime Minister will be having an event in number 10 this evening. Will the Prime Minister agree with me that it's important that we continue to have a debate on the floor of this House in government's time on Black History Month?
Prime Minister. Well, I'm not sure just at the moment going to something that's labelled Temptations is quite where I need to go. Look, this is a really important initiative. There will be... it is important it's being marked, and I'm very pleased to be hosting the event this evening, to which I think she is coming. Thank you.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's questions.
Indeed it does. That is the end of Prime Minister's questions. The first session since the party conferences, and I'm delighted to welcome straight from the chamber the Leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell, and the Shadow Leader of the Commons, Chris Philp, for the Conservatives, Nick Watt, Newsnight's political editor. Well, the budget was looming large coming on October the 30th when it came to the exchanges between Rishi Sunak as Leader of the Opposition, questioning Keir Starmer about what might be announced by the Chancellor Rachel Reeves. He reminded the Prime Minister that pre-election, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, had said changing the debt target would be fiddling the figures. What's going on here, Nick?
Well, it's pretty clear, and we did this last night, Jo, on Newsnight, that the Chancellor is very much moving in that direction. There was a story on the front page of The Guardian today.
We can have a look.
And it's pretty clear that they are, excuse the pun, on the money. Now, there are two ways in which you could change the debt rule. The first one is that you exclude Bank of England losses from asset sales. That could put you in the territory of about 10 billion. The other way is that you target public sector net worth. You basically take account of the values of public assets like roads, schools and hospitals. That could put you in the territory of 57 billion. Now, if you want to get an idea of what the Chancellor is thinking, because officially no decision has been made, no model has been decided on, look at her reading list. The Chancellor, very interested in an article by Gus O'Donnell, former Cabinet Secretary and Permanent Secretary of the Treasury in the FT. What did he say? The headline of that was, ditch the last government's absurd debt rule and invest to grow. Also reading a piece by Jim O'Neill, former Northern Powerhouse Minister under George Osborne in the Treasury, wrote pretty much the same thing. And what we're hearing from the government is they're seeing a growing coalition of people backing the change.
Would you like to see that happen, Lucy Powell, that the government borrows a lot more?
Well, look, I'm not here to discuss and speculate about
But I'm talking
the
about
budget,
principles.
But I think what we need, what our economy desperately needs is more investment.
From borrowing.
Absolutely needs investment. We've already brought in a huge amount of investment just in the last few weeks. Private sector and government investment coming together in some places, others private sector on its own. We've got a big investment summit next week. It's absolutely critical that we sort out the woeful infrastructure problems in this country. What we saw from the previous government, I'm afraid, was a number of commitments were made for which there was no funding there at all. Big infrastructure projects, new hospital, transport projects and others that the departments thought they'd got agreement for, but there was actually no money there to do. We've got to grow the economy. We've got to get those good jobs of the future.
All right,
and that's why we've been taking the action that we have.
But there were pledges made, obviously, during the election, and Rachel Reeves, actually even before then, last November, told reporters she wouldn't fiddle the figures, to use her words, and when it came to debt, she would use the same models the government uses. What's changed?
Well, look, anyone who knows Rachel knows that she is runs things with an iron fist, and she very much
she may well do. But what has changed?
Well, I'm not speculating about what has or hasn't changed. Right. I'm sure she would stand by those comments today as she did at the time. But what I am clear about is that I know that she will be doing everything she can to both protect and grow people's living standards, to grow the economy so that we can share the proceeds of that growth, support our public services. And the way we do that is by bringing in investment and sorting out some of the woeful infrastructure, whether that's transport infrastructure, whether that's clean energy infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, the technology infrastructure.
Fine, but let's stick with these rules, because I think for a lot of people watching, they can seem rather arbitrary. Important perhaps to politicians, but rather arbitrary to all of us. Is there a case to be made to actually perhaps slightly redefine the rules, to borrow more, to invest in the sorts of projects that Lucy has just outlined?
Well, £57 billion is more than slight. And let's just remind ourselves why we have these fiscal rules in the first place. They were introduced a few years ago. There have been different versions of these over the years. And the reason we have them is to make sure that politicians don't sort of run away with the nation's credit card and, waste money or cause government borrowing costs to rise and so on. So these fiscal rules are important for a reason. And as you said, Rachel Reeves was categoric in the past, the recent past. Less than a year ago, she said she would not be, as you pointed out, fiddling the figures, and she promised to stick to the same rules. And it would appear that once again, that is a lie, essentially. The Labour Party misled the public in the run-up to the election. They plan to rip up the rules despite having promised
Well, we don't know, but it does look, everything is indicated, it does. Are you saying that governments, previous governments, have never done things like borrow large amounts of money or changed the rules on borrowing?
Well, it has happened in the past over a number of decades, but it's rarely a good thing when they do change the rules. Gordon Brown used to famously change the rules.
And what about Liz Truss, where you were Chief Secretary to the Treasury to Liz Truss, and she borrowed, what was it, £45 billion to fund tax cuts, and what happened to that?
And look at what happened with Gordon Brown when he had the gigantic crash in 2009.
You've just made a very valid defence, in your words, of sticking to those rules, but it shows through history, all right, you want Gordon Brown, let's pick someone more recent, someone you served under, Liz Truss. It happens all the time, doesn't it?
Well, and I think there are those case studies that illustrate actually very well why you need to have fiscal rules that are
So you're
respected.
a convert to...
Well, I would say that the fact that Rachel Reeves is breaking her promises once again and appears to be, well, she was categorical, she wouldn't change the fiscal rules, and now she appears to be... And there's another broken promise on its way, which is national insurance.
Well, hang on, we'll come on to that in just a second. Lucy, you respond, and then I'll come... Yes, go on.
Is that the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is the statutory fiscal watchdog, had a report at the end of August saying you should do something like this. The OECD are saying you should do something like this. Gus O'Donnell, the former Cabinet Secretary and Permanent Secretary at the Treasury, says you should do this.
You know what?
So there's an interesting coalition building up behind
But if Rachel Reeves believed that, she should have had the honesty to say so during the general election campaign and not afterwards. And the public could then have decided what people are so upset about, whether it's winter fuel or this or other things, is the dishonesty of the Labour Party saying during the election campaign all their plans were fully funded, they said. No need for tax rises over and above what's in the manifesto. They've invented this ridiculous black hole that no one believes. And now they're breaking all their promises afterwards. They should have been honest and just said all this out during the election campaign.
Let Lucy answer
and then we could have decided,
point,
the public.
Because that is an important point. As I said at the beginning, it is about what you promised. Now, it may be the right thing to ditch the rules or tweak them or redefine them, get more investment in the way the sort of reports that Nick is citing. It's a good idea, but it wasn't what you said you were going to do.
The first line of our manifesto, which we absolutely embody and stand by, is about delivering economic stability, because we learned the lessons of the Liz... I mean, it doesn't sound like Chris has particularly learnt the lessons. We learnt the lessons of that disastrous Liz Truss mini-budget, as you say, ignoring all the rules, ignoring the spending watchdog, pledging £40 billion of unfunded tax, and that led to a run on government borrowing costs, a run on the interest rates that meant that everybody's interest rates went up.
What's to say that the markets won't be spooked if Rachel Reeves does something that she said she wasn't going to do?
Rachel will have an extremely keen eye on any possible market reaction. That will be absolutely key to what she's looking at.
Except the evidence, some of the evidence so far financially is that the price of government borrowing is going up. Now, maybe that's not important.
Her watchwords are economic stability and growth, and that is and what is that for? It is to raise ordinary people's living standards over the course of this Parliament, something that didn't happen in the last Parliament, where real living standards fell for the first time in 70 years.
We may have noticed COVID happened in the middle of that.
All right, is it important to stick to promises made during an election or not?
Of course it is. Right. Yes, of course.
So you might be breaking.
Well, look, I mean, no, I don't think we will be, but I don't know what the I'm not going to speculate about the budget, but we've been really clear that no tax rises on VAT, national insurance, economic stability is really important.
Well, Lucy Powell's brought up national insurance. So there was also a case here of Rishi Sunak asking the Prime Minister about another pledge, and that is the pledge Lucy has just broadly stated, which is taxes won't increase on working people. This phrase, working people, but he wouldn't rule out increasing national insurance contributions for employers.
That's right. So you saw Rishi Sunak, you know, the former Chancellor who basically knew more about economics and data than most of the officials working in the Treasury, and they're the cleverest civil servants in the country. So he spotted something. So Keir Starmer, the Labour manifesto, very clear, no increase in national insurance, VAT and income tax on working people. Little wrinkle in there spotted by Rishi Sunak. National insurance is levied on the employee, and it's also levied on the employer. So the question was, is there an opt-out? Have you given yourself an opt-out? In other words, the ability to raise national insurance on the employer? And the Prime Minister did not answer that question.
Lucy Powell? He didn't rule it out. And that would be another break with the manifesto.
He was really clear, you know, no increase on, as we said in our manifesto, we've said many, many times, there'll be no increase in VAT, national insurance and income tax, and that is what we have said.
On working
and we
people, which allows you to increase it on the employer.
We can, I mean, I know everybody wants to kind of preempt and speculate about a budget that's coming in nearly 3 weeks, 3 weeks yesterday. I don't know any more about what is in that budget than you or anybody else. So,
apart from there was a cabinet discussion about it yesterday, because
well, I'm certainly not talking about a cabinet discussion.
Hang on, Chris, because I mean we know that that's the debate that has come out of Prime Minister's questions, but previous Conservative government also promised in a manifesto not to increase those main taxes.
And then they did.
Thank you. Yeah. Finishing my line. They did.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, obviously we had COVID during the last Parliament, which somewhat upset the fiscal balance. But here is another promise that the Labour government is about to break. They told us in the election campaign that none of their plans required tax rises above those set out in the manifesto. This tax rise, which is evidently on its way, around employers' national insurance, was not in their manifesto, and yet they're about to do it, in the same way that Rachel Reeves promised she wasn't going to change the borrowing rules, and now she is. It's broken promise after broken promise.
But are they the right things to do?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a question of integrity, right? Look, when they only ran for office, 2 or 3 months ago, and already they are breaking the promises they solemnly made, and that is undermining trust in politics, and they should not be so recklessly breaking these promises so quickly. It is really bad for politics, and they should stick to what they pledged just a few weeks ago.
Look, it's like Chris starts his answer with, well, we had an unforeseen event of COVID, so it was OK for us to break our commitments. Our manifesto, everything that we pledged in our manifesto was fully costed. Absolutely, it was fully costed.
And why are these tax rises?
As you know, Chris, we have inherited a huge black hole that no one knew. The OBR didn't even know existed, and it's probably even worse than that. So there are many, as well as the actual in-year black hole. So £22 billion of things committed for in this financial year that was not funded. In future years, there were also many big. Hang on a minute. There were many big infrastructure projects that departments thought they had the money for that they didn't either. So we have had to take steps, because if we didn't...
Which steps? Let me explain. What steps have had to be taken?
We've already taken the difficult step on winter fuel payments to means test that. We've already had to take other steps that have already been announced.
£1.3 billion saved of a £22 billion black hole.
We announced over £5 billion of stuff.
Let Chris respond.
But the point is,
let me cut it
if we don't, there'll be a crash in the economy like happened when you were Chief Secretary.
Let me just explain the difference between COVID and your claimed black hole. COVID actually existed. The black hole doesn't.
Oh, God.
For a start, I mean, even the Treasury can't back it up.
You just carry on. Talk over each other because viewers can't hear.
And for a start, about half of that so-called black hole is inflation-busting public sector pay increases.
So you wouldn't have done those?
Including for train drivers that were decided upon by this Labour government. That was a £10 billion is not next to nothing. It's half of your supposed... Hang on, I didn't interrupt you. It's half of your supposed black hole is choices this Labour government has made to give their union paymasters inflation-busting pay rises.
But hang on, I will interrupt just briefly, Chris, because are you saying if the Conservatives had won this election, you wouldn't have agreed to those pay review body recommendations?
That was sitting on my desk.
Well, I'm not going to. Nothing was sitting on my desk as policemen.
All right, hang on, Lucy, hang on.
I can't speculate about how we would have settled these pay increases or how we would have funded them. What I do know is we would categorically not have stripped the winter fuel payment from the vast majority of pensioners, including 84% of those pensioners living in poverty. That is a disgraceful decision by this Labour government. They did not have to take.
Just finally, finally, because I think you have said it before, Lucy, but just to clarify, you are saying, still saying, that if you hadn't taken the measure to cut the winter fuel payment to millions of pensioners, then there was a risk of crashing the economy.
If we've got to balance the books. This is what happened under Liz Truss, where she had £40 billion worth of tax cuts.
You're saving 1.3, 1.4 billion.
No, there was a £22 billion.
No, from cutting the winter fuel payment to pension.
The overall strategy is economic stability, because when you don't have economic stability and the economy crashes, as did 2 years ago, the people who pay the heaviest price for that are ordinary working families and those on fixed incomes like pensioners, and that's why we have to take steps.
All right. People paying the price now are impoverished pensioners.
Chris might want to soak himself in the warm bath of opposition and not have to face up to the responsibility of the situation. They know they left us. They left us all these decisions to make, and we're having to take the action that they refuse to take.
Right, let me just
take money
hang on. Rishi Sunak was having a little bit of fun, I have to say, at the beginning over the bill that is going to be introduced tomorrow on employment rights, referring to the former Chief of Staff, Sue Gray. What did he say?
Well, Joe, it was quite a niche joke by the former Prime Minister, because it was saying to the current Prime Minister, I see you're a convert to the idea of stopping fire and rehire, and we're getting, as you say, the draft legislation on workers' rights tomorrow. So to what extent we'll see that? Obviously, everybody knows about Sue Gray losing her job as Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister and Morgan McSweeney getting that job. But the niche element of it, which not many people have noticed, is that Morgan McSweeney, the new Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer, was actually his Chief of Staff about 4 years ago after he won the leadership, until he was replaced by Sam White, who then went. Then there was a period where nobody was really the Chief of Staff and it was all the gang with Keir Starmer, and then Sue Gray became Chief of Staff. So it's talking about how Morgan McSweeney's basically got his old job back.
Well, before you came into the studio and before Prime Minister's questions, we spoke to the Chief Executive of Ipsos Mori, Kelly Beaver, who's been looking at the polls and says 2/3 of Brits are now dissatisfied with how the government is running the country, up 14 percentage points since July. Does that concern you, Lucy?
Well, look, obviously we want to be, popular and everyone to kind of think what we're doing is good. We are getting on with the job, and I think ultimately people will judge us in due course on whether their living standards are improved, whether their public services, particularly the NHS, waiting lists are down, whether they can get to see a GP, their living standards have gone up, we get some growth and good jobs into the economy, and the employment rights bill that we're introducing tomorrow is a huge piece of legislation that will be a big shift for those who are currently in insecure, low-paid work. So we want a high-wage,
OK,
secure
sure.
work
You've
economy.
set out some of the things that you are hoping to do, starting with this bill tomorrow. But Kelly Beaver also said what's been cutting through, in part, is this story, BBC News. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, repays more than £6,000 in gifts after donations row. What's your response to that?
To what?
Cutting through. The whole donations, the whole freebies row is cutting through with the public, and that, in part, has meant that your popularity has gone down.
Well, it's had a huge amount of attention, obviously, so I'm not surprised it's cutting through. But as I say, I think in the end, people will judge us on the big questions that they care about. They seem
to care about this.
Have their lives improved? Have their ability to access public services? Have their living standards improved? And I think, look, this whole kind of row about gifts and everything, obviously, transparency is really important. That's why we're talking about it. We've been very transparent about these things. But the most important thing, I think, is there any sense that people get undue influence, or there's a conflict of interest, or policies are changed as a result?
But
and I think categorically say, no, we are introducing the employment rights. Today, we've got the renters.
All right, well, hang on. Let me just...
All right, Lucy, but hang on. That because they're still in hot
Keir
to the landlord lobby.
Starmer is repaying, as it says there, more than £6,000 in gifts. Are you going to repay any gifts that you have received since the election?
The couple of things that are in my transparency report since the election were things I was attending in a well, the one thing was attending in a work capacity. So,
so you won't be paying those back. So that's all right for cabinet ministers like you who attend things or attended things with their jobs, connected to their jobs. That's fine.
Well, look, what we're doing is two things here. One is we are increasing. We're going to be increasing transparency. So what we've had over the last nearly 10 years is a situation that the Tories brought in where ministers didn't have to declare a value of their hospitality and gifts, but MPs and shadow ministers did, which is why myself and Keir and others have got that. So we're going to align those two systems as the previous government kept saying they would do and didn't. Right. Secondly, we are going to bring in tougher guidance and tougher rules for ministers about what kind of gifts and hospitality is acceptable.
All right, well, let me get...
And part of that will be work purposes.
Right, well, I mean, Chris, you must accept that this has been going on, rightly or wrongly, acceptance of gifts for time immemorial. This is from the Times in November last year. Policing Minister, that was you, failed to declare VIP football tickets. Chris Philp attended the match as a guest of the FA and sat in the Royal Box in hospitality worth more than £6,000. Was that justifiable?
Well, I was there as a minister in DCMS, which obviously covers sport. That's right. So I was there in that capacity, and the office should have declared it and didn't. And as soon as it was drawn to my attention, obviously I put it down. But I think the thing with the Keir Starmer...
Yeah, what's the difference?
Well, the thing with so I was attending in my capacity as a minister.
And you didn't have to put a value on it when you were a minister,
And I think what is kind of slightly shocking about the Keir Starmer thing is the £107,000 of freebies, clothes, spectacles. It's more than any other member of Parliament. It's a huge sum of money. But you don't need to be. And I paid for this suit. I'm sure we all paid for our own clothes. We don't need a millionaire donor to pay for our clothes and our spectacles, or to provide a £18 million penthouse, or give Angela Rayner a holiday apartment in New York. That's all just ridiculous.
Did you need to sit in the Royal Box? Michael Gove apparently attended that match you went to. You declared tickets worth £600.
Well, actually, I didn't choose where to sit. I was asked to go, and I sat where I was told to sit. Look, but I think, clothes, spectacles, luxury apartments, holidays, Angela Rayner in a DJ booth in Ibiza. I think the public look at that and think it's ridiculous, particularly as Keir Starmer did sort of clothe himself in this mantle of moral superiority. He had a go at Boris a couple of years ago, and now it turns out... he's the same.
Well, we should remind people, Boris Johnson this week claimed that Keir Starmer looked greedy for accepting gifts, as you say, for clothes and glasses. But Boris Johnson accepted a fair few freebies in his time. £23,000 to pay for his wedding to Carrie Simons in 2022, a holiday to Mustique in 2019 worth £15,000, and a free trip to Zach Goldsmith, who was a former minister, his villa in Marbella in 2021. Was that greedy?
I don't think, frankly, MPs, including Boris and including Keir Starmer, should be accepting those kind of personal items like holidays or clothes. None of us and no one watching has ever had a donor buy us clothes. It's a ridiculous idea, and Keir Starmer should be ashamed of himself, particularly because he was the one calling out Boris a couple of years ago for doing exactly the same thing. It's pure hypocrisy.
No, hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. I think we just really do need to be distinct here. Boris Johnson, the loan for his doing up his flat, he didn't declare, and he was found in serious breach of the parliamentary rules for not doing so. The guy who brokered that loan for him, that amount of money for him, a few days after he brokered it, was given a plum job as chairman of the BBC without that going through due process. These things are not equivalent. You and everybody else voted to let one of your colleagues off the hook when they broke the lobbying rules of the House of Commons. They were found in serious breach, and you tried to change the rules to get them off the hook. They're not equivalent.
All right,
well, we've been transparent.
What about Lord Ali with his...
Hang on. And we are...
What about Lord Ali with his Downing Street pass? He's now in Downing Street.
He's not in Downing Street.
He was temporarily.
And he was advising the appointment.
While these two... Hang on, while these two...
for Boris Johnson, because he did say that the Downing Street flat was like a crack den. It turned out the reason why it was a crack den was because Dylan the dog. Dylan the dog was untrained in domestic
Whereas the implication was it was Theresa May.
It wasn't Theresa May, it was Dylan
conjured up all sorts of images. Just generally, in terms of where this row over donations and freebies and so on, I think we've demonstrated that it's difficult for both sides to justify. But Keir Starmer's talked about introducing principles of general application. What does that mean?
Well, what's happened is that this has sort of shone a light on it. And one of the interesting things is Chris sitting in the Royal Box as a minister. That goes on the ministerial register, which is not massively open. At the very same time Chris would have done that, Lucy would have been Shadow Culture Secretary, going to lots of events like that, as part of Lucy's then job, and that would have been declared on the MP's register, which would have had lots more information. So it's sort of shining a light on that discrepancy, which I think the Prime Minister wants to tackle. But the fundamental point for the Prime Minister was before the election, he was leader of the opposition, had a salary in excess of £100,000, and the big question is, if you've got a salary of that level, do you need your suits paid for?
Before we go, the Conservative leadership contest. It's all getting very interesting. It was interesting before, but even more so because we are now down to 3 contenders. And this time, James Cleverly, the Shadow Home Secretary, has leapfrogged ahead of the other 2. We can see all 4 here, as was yesterday before Tom Tugendhat, the Shadow Security Minister, was knocked out.
Yes, I mean, James Cleverly, as we all saw, did a very good speech at the conference, and he went up by 18 votes, up to 39, way ahead of the field. You would assume, although you can't guarantee, because each of these ballots is a fresh ballot, that he goes through to the final 2, and the question is it Robert Jenrick or is it Kemi Badenoch? Now, both Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch had difficult conferences. Robert Jenrick, because of what he said about special forces, killing rather than capturing. Kemi Badenoch, because appearing to raise questions over the level of maternity pay. MPs will have to make a judgment.
That hasn't helped, has it? Just to show you're backing Kemi Badenoch, Chris, and their headline, their BBC News, Kemi Badenoch maternity pay comments sparked Tory row. How much damage has that done to her campaign?
Well, I think she said that that's not what she said in the interview, certainly not what she intended to say, and she very rapidly confirmed that she has no plans to change maternity pay. Rightly, it's an important thing.
Can she make it to the final 2?
It is. Well, it's going to be close. I really hope she can. I'm going to be voting for her in a couple of hours' time. I think Nick's analysis was, as ever, very sort of on the.
That's why we've got him here.
Well, he's earning his keep today.
I did pay for this.
I'm glad to hear that. You haven't been looked after by Lord Wahid Ali.
I think we've almost run out of time, but you are still backing Kemi Badenoch. It's all we have time for today. Thank you to all of my guests for a very energetic half of the programme, and I'll be back tomorrow at 12:15. Bye.